I want to talk a little bit today about philosophy, of course, but um, the idea of creating philosophy or why we make philosophy and what that means. You've been creating philosophy in one way or another this semester, um, at the very least, as you've been writing your journals and writing on discussion boards. But I would imagine you've been creating philosophy as you engage in conversations with others, as you open up a text and read it and start to think about that text. You've been engaging in philosophy. Coming now to the end of the semester, at a moment when we are going to start thinking about an overall academic project, it's worth thinking about the difference between a school assignment and the idea of creating philosophy. When I teach freshman writing, um, I often try to, I'm sorry, when I teach intro to college writing, I often try to get students to think about the differences between what it means just to write because a teacher tells you and what it means to write because you have an idea, an argument you want to establish and prove to others. It's a poem by Dorothy Parker. Philosophy. If I should labor through daylight and dark, consecrate, valorous, serious, true, then on the world I may blazon my mark. And what if I don't? And what if I do? You could probably exist in this world without ever making a solid philosophical argument that is both grounded in academic writing and thought, but also in really smart thinking and really clever development. You could probably survive without that. But this class is in part not just about all the reading we have to do and all the thinking we've got to do, but also about the writing we have to do, about how we create something with what we're doing. What's the point of reading all of this if you never have anything to say? So, we are going to think about that writing and what it means to say something. But before we do that, I want to talk for a moment about academic citizenship. And we'll use Rousseau here. Rousseau says that each of us puts their full idea in common under the supreme direction of accepted truths, and in a body we receive each argument as an indivisible part of the whole. It doesn't quite say that. He says each of us puts our full self under the same supreme direction of the common good or the common body, and in this body we each receive each other as part of the whole, or something like that. His idea is, of course, that when we are acting in a society that matters, when a civilization that matters, a community that matters, when we are acting in unison with each other, we put ourselves into this collective, this body, under the direction of the collective or the body. And in that, we are accepted into a community that makes us an equal and necessary part of that community. So that community has to consider our views, has to consider our experiences and our knowledges, and it gets changed by that. And if we ever leave that community, we ever leave that whole, we have changed the community itself. The academic world functions quite like this. The idea that we are all here together, establishing, learning ideas and studying ideas and creating ideas and establishing those ideas and arguing for those ideas. The academic community is this idea of everybody coming together to create knowledge, knowledge that matters. One of the things about Rousseau that is really wonderful is that he doesn't stop at saying, we're all equal, we all belong, which is just some BS that we tell ourselves. how is it that we all belong, or how is it that we all equal when we have people being killed in the streets, or when we have some people saying I have a right to carry this gun and other people dying because other people are carrying guns? How are we all equal? Well, the thing about Rousseau is that he doesn't just stop at the fact that we are all equal. He moves on to the idea that if we are all equal, then we have a responsibility to protect the equalness of somebody else. We have a responsibility to respect the body of somebody else. Because when we do, we are expecting that they can respect ours. This is what Robert Dahl talks about when he talks about reciprocity. When we participate in a community, we can expect that we have responsibilities to that community because we know the community has responsibilities to us. What does that have to do with college writing or writing a philosophy project? Well, you've been participating all semester in these ideas, these amazing ideas. Maybe you haven't found all of them amazing, but they're important. They are important ideas that should be changing your world and our world together. And if you have experienced that change, that means you have invested yourself in some level in those ideas. If you've learned something here, you have gained something from this. You have invested part of yourself. You have begun to see yourself as a part of a larger community, and as such, you have a responsibility to that community. Part of that responsibility is learning the ideas of the community, but then when you recognize that the academic world requires you to put your full ideas in common under the supreme direction of accepted truths, you have to contribute to that community. You have to make something. Because the community doesn't function without each part. It is your participation here is indivisible from others' participation. You got a paper to write. Some people will look at that paper as just another assignment that they got to do, some kind of bullshit that they got to write. I got to write this paper. Oh man, it's due in 2 days. What am I going to write? How am I going to come up with something? And some people will go so far as to completely disregard and disrespect the entire community and go and copy their paper or buy their paper or present something that they haven't really thought about. They're going to write some BS and turn it in. And I'm not judging anybody here. I think you'll get some judgment if you cheat, but I'm not judging anybody here. You do what you can when you can do it, and hopefully it's meaningful in some way for you. But remember that what you participate in here, what you are adding, should be adding to the community as a whole. That is part of what it means to be an academic citizen and not just a student who has to do some bullshit homework. What must your paper do? Your paper must establish and prove an argument within one specific area of philosophy we have studied: education, the nature of being, consciousness of self, gods and belief, awareness of others, governance, ethics, justice, or whatever else we're talking about in these final weeks. You must focus on one of those areas. It must use at least 2 of the texts we've read for class as building blocks, support, or counterpoints to your argument. Use here means that you provide details from the text that are related to your argument. It does not mean passing general references. So, the argument that you're establishing within a particular area has to use 2 of our texts, and those texts have to be used in a meaningful way in the paper, not just as a random quote. Number 3, your writing must show that you've learned something from Philosophy 130. Maybe this hasn't been a meaningful class to you. Maybe the stress of it or the amount of reading, and I heard you on your exams. A lot of people feel like there's too much reading. Maybe that has made this less likely for you to learn something, but that's kind of our job here, is to learn something. So you got to show me that you've learned something from this class. Number 4, your paper must be developed at a sophisticated level, showing the thought and effort required in college coursework. Don't turn in just a bunch of words. Don't turn in something that you haven't really thought about. Don't turn in something that doesn't try to say anything. Make sure you're working on an idea here that is sophisticated enough to show that you're actually getting through a philosophy one philosophy 130 class. The work in your text must be equivalent to the work one would put in a 5-page term paper for a college class. Now, almost everybody here is going to do a term paper or an essay, and I think that's probably the best choice for most people. Some people may choose to step outside that and create some other text that can do all these things. We use 2 different texts, establish and prove an argument. Some people may choose to step outside of that. But if you do that, you've still got to make sure you're doing the work that allows you to do a 5-page term paper. And let me also warn you, if you're going to step outside and do something different, let's say you decide you want to create a documentary film. Fine. You want to create that film, you should know how to create a film. Let's say you want to step outside this and create a mural, like the murals in the DIA, the Detroit Institute of Arts. Well, okay, you got to know how to paint, and you got to have a place to do the mural. If you're going to create something, make sure you're creating something meaningful that allows you to accomplish the goals of the assignment, and that also that you know have some knowledge of doing. This is particularly for those of you who might see this number 5 and say, oh, I'll just do a bullshit PowerPoint. A PowerPoint is rarely a good choice, even though I use them for lectures. A PowerPoint is just a bunch of slides put together, and unless you really know what you're doing with PowerPoint or why you're doing it, I'd highly recommend you avoid it. Number 6, you must use proper citation and be created with academic integrity. That's a requirement. Sorry. You can't just steal somebody's work and present it as your own. Philosophy only matters when it's shared. Some people might argue with this notion, but for me, what's the point of doing philosophy if you don't talk about it? And that's what we're doing here with our project, is we're talking about philosophy. We're also going to talk about it next week in our class, when I'm going to ask you to submit a draft of your project to a workshop and have people comment on it. We are going to talk about your philosophy. Now, ideally, the draft you submit is ready to go. It is a full essay that you have really developed and worked on, and you're ready for people to argue with you, so you submit that. Ideally, that's what you got. Maybe what you have is a introduction and a conclusion, and you're still working on the body. Or maybe what you have is a full description of what you plan on doing with your paper, with an outline, a thesis statement, but you haven't quite gotten all the writing done. I'm not going to put a requirement on how much you have to have done here. Ideally, the best thing is to have a full draft, but you will have to have something ready for next week, because philosophy only matters when it's shared. How do you know that what you're creating here is going to contribute to our community and meet your academic responsibility unless you have other people look at it? Part of my community is trying to call me. I want you to keep in mind as you're doing this, philosophy can be fun and it can still be academic. You can write about interesting things here. You can create interesting ideas with interesting topics. You can write about the philosophy of the Avengers, the Marvel Universe. You can write about the philosophy of playing Fortnite. You can write about the philosophy of punk music or hip hop. What matters here is that you're coming up with a meaningful idea with within one of those areas we've talked about, and you can apply it in a meaningful way to something that matters to you and to other people. Philosophy can be fun. You can do something fun here, as long as you're also maintaining the idea of what philosophy is trying to accomplish. What is your project? Your project is to make philosophy, to create something of meaning for you, for me, for the class. Go make philosophy. Do something cool. Do something you can be proud of. I look forward to seeing what you make.